Welcome to a photograph that defies logic. Taken high above the desolate New Mexico desert in July 1935. The Goddard Squadron was on what should have been an ordinary reconnaissance flight. Engines roaring, propellers slicing the thin air, the sun glinting off metal wings. Routine, precise, predictable. But in the frame of one seemingly mundane photograph, a face appears. Staring directly at the camera, eyes piercing through the lens, as if alive, though no one on board recalls a soul standing there. Though the sky above was empty, though the plane's logs mention nothing unusual, it is a face that should not exist, a spectral observer captured mid-flight, impossible, unexplainable, haunting, lingering even decades later, as if the air itself refuses to release its secret. July 1935, New Mexico. The wind whipping the desert dust across the plains. Radios crackling with routine chatter, engines humming in a chorus of controlled chaos. The squadron, unaware of the anomaly, recorded in film forever. Pilots focused on their instruments, eyes scanning the endless horizon, the desert stretching beneath them, empty, vast, silent. But the photograph tells a different story, hinting at something beyond sight. And yet, before we delve deeper, before the story unfolds, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening. Share the chill, share the unease, share the moment when the impossible whispers through your screen. Because what you are about to witness challenges reality itself. July 1935. New Mexico, the desert sun hanging high, scorching the plains, the air thin, dry, shimmering with heat. The Goddard Squadron lifted from a small airstrip nestled among rocky outcrops, engines thrumming, propellers cutting the wind with a metallic scream. 3 small reconnaissance planes, painted a dull gray to blend with the earth, carried men trained for precision, for observation, for duty. Radios buzzed intermittently. Voices clipped professional routine, but there was an underlying tension, the kind that comes from flying above an empty landscape that stretches beyond human comprehension. The desert seemed alive, an unbroken canvas of sand and stone, the mountains in the distance jagged and foreboding, the horizon a blur where sky and land merged in endless heat. Dust rose in invisible eddies from the wind brushing against the fuselage, rattling the instruments, whispering against the pilot's ears, a constant reminder that this was a land untamed, hostile, and yet breathtaking. The men on board were alert, but distracted by the monotony of the survey. Maps sprawled across laps, notebooks in hand, pencils scratching recording coordinates, noting geological features, logging altitudes and bearings, ensuring every detail was exact. Lieutenant Harold Stevens, a methodical man with years of reconnaissance experience, squinted through the cockpit glass, his eyes tracing the patterns of ridges and valleys below, calculating angles, double-checking readings. Beside him, Sergeant Carl Monroe, younger, eager, restless, tapped at the radio, communicating with ground control, confirming transmission windows. The rhythm of the flight was mechanical, predictable. The hum of the engines, a constant pulse, the desert silent beneath them, except for the occasional cry of a distant hawk, the whisper of wind over rock, the faint rumble of sand shifting in the heat. And yet, even amidst the routine, the landscape had a presence, an awareness. The desert, vast and unyielding, seemed to watch. Shadows stretched unnaturally across mesas. Mirages formed and dissolved as if the air itself breathed, and every sudden glint of sunlight against the plane's metal skin felt like an eye tracking their passage. The men, disciplined and rational, told themselves these were tricks of light and heat, the mind's reaction to monotony. But an unease had begun to creep in. Lieutenant Stevens felt it first, a chill despite the sun, a sense that the space around them contained something unseen. A figure that moved just beyond the periphery of vision, never fully realized yet unmistakable in its suggestion. At 11,500 feet, Sergeant Monroe adjusted the camera strapped to the wing strut, a device meant to document the terrain for mapping purposes. The film reels were standard, ordinary, a tool of the trade, but there was a moment when the sun caught the lens at the perfect angle, glinting, reflecting, casting an image that none of them could have predicted. The shutter clicked, mechanical, deliberate, capturing what was meant to be another section of empty desert, another stretch of rock and sand, another fragment of geography. Only when the film was developed days later, one frame contained a figure. It was not a shadow, not a trick of light, not a reflection. It was a face clear and staring eyes fixed in a silent gaze, mouth set, in expressionless permanence, a presence that the men swore they did not see at the moment of capture. Back on the ground, the photograph was examined with incredulity. Lieutenant Stevens held the negative against the light, squinting, turning it in every direction. Experts in photography were consulted technicians who had seen every form of double exposure, chemical anomaly development error. Nothing explained what appeared in that frame. No one could account for it. The logbooks, meticulous as ever, mentioned nothing of any additional personnel, no unidentified passengers, no errors. The anomaly became a singular occurrence catalogued as such in the official records, a footnote that hinted at something beyond empirical understanding. The desert itself seemed to swallow explanations. Locals in the small towns surrounding the survey area spoke in hushed tones about airmen and surveyors who vanished planes that returned with odd readings, photographs that captured more than terrain. Stories of spirits, watchers, guardians of the vast open landscape circulated quietly. These were not tales meant to be believed by outsiders, certainly not by men of the military, but whispers carry weight when repetition persists, when multiple sources, multiple decades, echo similar experiences. Stevens Monroe and the other airmen were reluctant to speak publicly. Their careers demanded professionalism, denial of the extraordinary, and yet the image lingered in their minds, haunting their recollections, raising questions that had no answers. Flight patterns were retraced, the same coordinates, examined maps, reviewed instruments, checked. Nothing suggested an intrusion. Nothing explained the face that stared unblinking from the developed photograph. Some hypothesized a bird, a rock formation catching the light at an improbable angle, or a technical flaw invisible to technicians. Yet the clarity of the face, its unmistakable features, and the feeling it evoked in those who saw it defied rational explanation. It was not merely a curiosity. It was a provocation, an unspoken challenge to perception, a reminder that the desert, for all its emptiness, might harbor mysteries unseen. Time pressed forward, months passed, and the desert remained the same, expansive, silent, yet alive in rumor and memory. Historians and archivists who later examined the Goddard Squadron files noted the photograph, filed it, and moved on, but the anomaly became a subject of private speculation. Letters between technicians discussed the impossibility of the image notes scribbled in margins of reports, questioned sanity, chance, and perception. The men themselves, bound by duty and decorum, carried the experience privately, the face burned into memory, as something that should not exist yet undeniably did. The terrain they mapped revealed nothing supernatural, yet its silence was a canvas for the imagination. Heat shimmered off the earth, creating illusions of movement. Shadows stretched longer than logic dictated. Wind sculpted dunes and dust devils ephemeral and fleeting. Even routine observation became fraught with the possibility of encountering the inexplicable. Each flight thereafter carried a caution born not of danger in the traditional sense, but of awareness that the environment might not fully yield its secrets, that the human eye and mind could only interpret fragments, and that some phenomena eluded explanation entirely. Within months, photographs from subsequent flights were scrutinized more carefully. Pilots and technicians approached each frame with heightened suspicion, questioning the authenticity of reality as it was captured on film. The original negative, the one containing the face, was carefully preserved, locked away in a secure archive, but copies circulated enough to spark debate and curiosity among military personnel and scientific observers. Each viewing reinforced the impossibility. Each gaze at the image brought an unnerving sense of being watched, a feeling that the face was not merely a static anomaly, but an active presence, a silent witness embedded within the material of the photograph itself. The narrative of that day in July 1935 began to intertwine with folklore, with the understanding that human perception and memory are fragile yet persistent. Witnesses swore to details beyond the photograph, the quality of light, the sudden chill in the cabin, the way the wind seemed to respond to the presence unseen. Each element, mundane in isolation, combined into a tableau that hinted at something extraordinary. Even decades later, the story circulated among military historians, aviation enthusiasts, and those with an eye for anomalies, gaining layers of interpretation, speculation, and legend. In retrospect, the flight and its photograph became more than documentation. It became a symbol. a reminder that the natural world, vast and silent, contains moments that challenge understanding. That observation, however precise, cannot fully account for every variable. That human presence, no matter how trained or disciplined, can encounter phenomena that defy categorization. The desert, indifferent and eternal, remains a witness to these events, recording them not only in ink and film, but in the whispered memories of those who passed through its skies. Thus, July 1935. New Mexico is remembered not only as a routine survey flight, but as the day when the Goddard Squadron encountered the unexplainable. The engines hummed, the wind blew, the radios crackled, the sun beat down upon metal wings, and yet a face appeared where none should have existed. A single frame, a frozen instant, a question without answer. And for the men who flew that day, for the technicians who developed the film, for the historians who pieced together the logs decades later, the event stands as a singular haunting reminder that reality can sometimes be stranger than any legend, and that the desert keeps its secrets patient, silent, and unyielding. The photograph from July 1935 became the centerpiece of debate, a silent artifact that challenged reason and demanded scrutiny. When the negatives were first developed, the lab technicians were stunned. No anomaly should have appeared. The film had been handled according to protocol, each step checked and double-checked, yet there it was, a face staring, immobile, unmistakable. Lieutenant Stevens reviewed the frames with trembling hands, comparing the anomaly to surrounding terrain, confirming distances and angles. There was no shadow, no reflection, no distortion that could explain what had been captured. Sergeant Monroe, normally pragmatic and skeptical, was unable to reconcile his logical training with the undeniable image before him. The face was there, present, and yet impossible. Official reports filed by the squadron made no mention of the anomaly. The logbooks remained clinical, precise, cataloging coordinates, altitudes, wind speeds, and visibility. The mission itself was routine in every measurable way. Yet when Stevens submitted the photographs for review at the regional military archives, the anomaly could not be ignored. The archivists, steeped in bureaucracy and procedure, noted the frame, labeled it as an unexplained occurrence, and moved on. But the men who had flown that day carried the memory with them, uneasy, unsettled, aware that the airspace they had navigated was for a fleeting moment touched by something beyond comprehension. The photograph underwent forensic examination. Experts in optical phenomena analyzed the negatives under high magnification. They tested for double exposures, chemical contamination, and light refraction. Nothing accounted for the presence of the face. The contours were consistent with human features, the shading aligned with the ambient light at the time of flight, and the focus was sharp where it should have been. No error could simulate the lifelike intensity that seemed to radiate from the figure's eyes. Even attempts to replicate the image using controlled experimental photography failed. Each reproduction lacked the presence, the singularity, the inexplicable detail that made the original frame so unsettling. Witness testimony corroborated the impossibility. Every crew member of the Goddard Squadron swore they had seen no one beyond themselves. The cockpit observations, radio communications, and recorded maneuvers confirmed that the planes had been isolated. No additional personnel could have been present, and no one had entered or exited mid-flight. Yet the photograph suggested otherwise. Analysts considered optical illusions, pareidolia, and pattern recognition errors, but these explanations faltered under scrutiny. The eyes of the figure seemed to hold intent, an awareness beyond mere coincidence. Each examination deepened the mystery rather than resolved it. Historical comparison revealed similar anomalies in other military photographic records, though none matched the clarity and immediacy of the Goddard Squadron frame. Instances of spectral figures or unexplained presences had been documented in reconnaissance missions dating back decades, often dismissed as artifacts or misinterpretations. Yet the consistency in description, the singular face appearing in isolation, the absence of shadows, the unmistakable human features established a motif that could not be casually ignored. The phenomenon seemed selective, emerging only in specific circumstances, in particular environments, when observation was both precise and exacting. The men of the squadron, bound by professional duty, discussed the image in hushed tones. Speculation ranged from practical to impossible. Could it be a passenger unnoticed? Impossible. Could it be a reflection from some unseen surface, or a trick of sunlight against the lens? Experts had ruled this out. Could it be a premonition, a psychological projection onto the photograph, an artifact of memory intertwined with image? These questions could not be answered definitively. Stevens kept a personal journal meticulously detailing every element of the flight, and his reactions to the anomaly, noting the emotional weight of the encounter, the tension it created in the cabin, and the lingering disquiet that accompanied him for weeks afterward. Further investigation uncovered correspondence between military photographers and scientists in New Mexico. Reports discussed instances of photographic anomalies in high-altitude surveys. Letters described figures appearing where none should exist, faces or bodies captured in flight photographs, often without explanation. The tone of these documents was clinical yet tinged with unease. The anomaly in the Goddard Squadron photograph became a reference point, a case study in the inexplicable frequently cited for its clarity, for the impossibility of human error, and for the psychological impact it had on those who had witnessed it. Attempts to recreate the conditions of the flight were undertaken decades later. Modern technology allowed precise replication of altitude lighting and camera angles. Simulations produced a landscape identical to the one traversed by the squadron, yet the face never reappeared. Researchers concluded that whatever was captured in 1935 could not be reproduced under controlled circumstances, reinforcing the singularity and mystery of the original photograph. Each viewing by contemporary analysts elicited the same reaction: disbelief, followed by a creeping unease, a recognition that reality had been momentarily breached by something unexplainable. The archival files contained no resolution. The photograph remained a static witness to an event whose nature defied conventional explanation. Historians examining the squadron's mission noted its importance in documenting terrain and resources, but were compelled to acknowledge the anomaly, however reluctantly. For Stevens and Monroe, and for all who encountered the image over the years, the face was more than a curiosity. It was a question, a challenge, a reminder that even in the most methodical of human endeavors, the universe could insert moments of the unknown, moments that resisted categorization, moments that demanded attention without offering answers. Thus, the fact layer of this story is anchored in documentation, in meticulous record-keeping, in technical verification, and expert analysis. Every measure, every protocol, every step of photographic development confirms that the figure in the photograph was not a mistake, not an accident, not a trick. It existed undeniably, unaccountably, and with it carried the weight of mystery. The Goddard Squadron did not encounter a landscape alone. They traversed a sky that for one frame contained a presence that continues to haunt the archives, the memory of the men, and the imagination of all who gaze upon the image decades later. The face captured on film stands as a testament to the persistence of the inexplicable, a singular fact that bridges the ordinary with the extraordinary, a moment where reality faltered and the unknown intruded. Stories of the photograph spread quietly among those who frequented the desert towns surrounding the Goddard Squadron's flight path. Locals spoke of the Watcher, above a spirit said to roam the skies, appearing only to those who charted the vast, empty expanse. Children whispered tales of men in planes glimpsing figures that did not belong, faces that stared without emotion, as though the land itself had eyes. Ranchers recounted livestock behaving oddly, before storms, shadows moving, where no wind could reach, dust rising in patterns that seemed intentional, deliberate, almost sentient. The desert was no longer merely land. It became a stage for the uncanny, a realm where folklore and reality intertwined. Every person who heard these stories felt a chill, a sense that the earth, the sky, and the air held secrets far older and deeper than human understanding. Pilots who had flown near the area told of instruments behaving strangely. Compasses spinning, radios crackling with voices unintelligible yet urgent, of sudden gusts of wind lifting planes unexpectedly. The Goddard Squadron men recalled that sensation, an inexplicable pressure in the cabin, a stillness in the air that did not belong. Some described a weight, as if the unseen figure hovered just beyond perception, its presence pressing against reality, registering in thought and emotion before the eyes could confirm it. The photograph, when shown to those familiar with the desert lore, elicited nods, recognition, murmured agreement. The face in the frame was no anomaly. It was a manifestation of stories long told around campfires, passed down through generations of desert dwellers who had learned to respect what could not be explained. Accounts of similar figures appeared in journals of surveyors and early aviators who mapped the Southwest. One diary from 1929 noted an observer capturing aerial photographs and later discovering an extra figure in a frame eyes wide and staring the body, indistinct but unmistakable. Another letter dated 1932 described a pilot seeing a shadowy silhouette on a ridge during a flight, later appearing in the photograph despite the area being uninhabited. Patterns emerged. The anomalies occurred in high open spaces under clear skies, with intense sunlight always in the same region. The recurrence hinted at something persistent, a presence with purpose, a guardian, a witness, or perhaps a warning. Scholars who examined these cases often dismissed them in print, attributing them to optical illusions, imagination, or psychological projection. But privately, many admitted the similarities defied simple rationalization. Oral traditions from indigenous communities in New Mexico added another layer. Elders spoke of spirits that traversed the sky, protectors of the land watchers who observed human activity and occasionally made themselves known to those who disturbed the balance. Some claimed these entities could pass through walls, appear in reflections, or manifest on surfaces to communicate messages or issue warnings. A particular legend told of the sky sentinel, a figure visible only in fleeting glimpses and in images captured unknowingly by observers, often appearing to those who attempted to measure, claim, or map sacred territory. The alignment of these stories with the photograph of the Goddard Squadron suggested not just coincidence but a resonance and echo of older beliefs, manifesting in the modern technology of cameras and reconnaissance planes. Folklore also carried warnings about perception. Eyes that see too much may glimpse truths that unsettle. Capturing an image is not merely recording. It is an act that can disturb, provoke, and reveal. The face in the Goddard Squadron photograph became emblematic of these beliefs. It represented the intersection of the known and unknown, the tangible and intangible. Every viewer confronted it as a puzzle, a challenge, a momentary breach of reality that was at once compelling and terrifying. Scholars of myth and legend argued that such anomalies were narrative devices, ways for cultures to encode warnings about hubris, about attempting to control or fully understand the natural world. The desert, vast and indifferent, provided the canvas. The photograph provided the evidence. Accounts spread beyond the immediate region. Aviation enthusiasts, cryptic researchers, and amateur paranormal investigators began referencing the photograph alongside others from similar periods. A 1940s military survey report mentioned the Goddard Squadron anomaly in passing, noting that similar phenomena had been reported by other reconnaissance teams, but never documented with such clarity. Folklore enthusiasts interpreted this as proof of continuity stories, evolving layered passing from oral tradition into empirical observation. The desert became mythic territory, a liminal space where modernity encountered timeless mystery. Researchers began cataloging the folklore alongside factual reports, acknowledging that while explanation was lacking, narrative persisted. The figure in the photograph was no longer just a technical anomaly. It became part of a larger, enduring story that connected past and present. Personal testimonies added weight to the legend. A retired pilot speaking decades later recounted his first encounter with desert flights in the early 1940s. He described sudden unease, instruments flickering without cause, and glimpses of what he initially dismissed as clouds or mirages, only to later recognize elements consistent with stories he had heard about the sky sentinel. Veterans who viewed the original photograph commented on the intensity of the gaze, the way it seemed to track movement, creating a dissonance between recorded reality and perceived reality. Even skeptics admitted to a visceral reaction, a tightening in the chest, a shiver, a sense of being observed. Folklore and fact were entwined in this response, a shared acknowledgement of the uncanny. The landscape itself reinforced the narrative. Desert winds, shifting sands, and mirages created an environment conducive to legend. Heat waves distorted sightlines, casting ephemeral forms that appeared human. Dust devils rose unpredictably, spinning columns that could suggest figures. Light reflected from rocks, minerals, and metallic surfaces to create illusions. Observers aware of these natural tricks still could not account for the photograph. The convergence of environment, human perception, and unexplained phenomena amplified the impact of the face in the frame. It became a cultural touchstone, a story retold in local bars, aviation circles, and military recollections, linking disparate experiences into a shared folklore. Letters exchanged among families of the squadron members indicate unease that persisted. Children were warned not to fly over certain areas. Elders counseled respect for the desert and its unseen guardians. Stories of the face and the reactions it provoked circulated quietly, passed from one generation to the next. It was a tale that balanced between warning and wonder, between fear and fascination. The figure in the photograph became a symbol, a reminder that even in the era of technology of measurement and precision, there remained mysteries that resisted quantification, moments when the ordinary became extraordinary, when the world seemed to expand beyond human comprehension. Through the lens of folklore, the Goddard Squadron photograph transcended its moment. It connected the empirical with the mythic, the desert, with the sky-human endeavor, with ancient warnings. The anomaly became an emblem of narrative persistence, a ghost story woven into the fabric of modern exploration. It demonstrated how fact and legend are not always separate, how a single image can carry multiple layers of meaning, and how perception, memory, and story intersect to create something that endures. The face remains staring from the frame, a silent participant in a tale that bridges decades, a focal point for wonder, fear, and speculation. The anomaly captured by the Goddard Squadron did not exist in isolation. Across decades, similar occurrences peppered the records of aerial reconnaissance, military surveys, and scientific expeditions. Faces, figures, shadows, always fleeting, always inexplicable, appeared in photographs or were glimpsed from cockpits, yet eluded explanation. Patterns emerged. The phenomena occurred over vast, empty landscapes under intense sunlight at high altitudes, often when instruments were functioning perfectly. Analysts began referring to these incidents collectively as sky anomalies, a term deliberately neutral, designed to acknowledge documentation without implying causation or intent. The anomalies shared motifs, singular faces, immobile yet observing, impossible to locate in physical space yet captured on film or in fleeting memory. Researchers traced threads of similarity between the Goddard Squadron photograph and other historical events. A 1929 survey flight over Arizona produced a negative containing a shadowy figure, partially obscured, eyes wide, expressionless, positioned where no human should have been. In 1932, another reconnaissance team in Nevada returned with aerial photographs showing indistinct silhouettes on ridgelines. Each report was meticulous, each analysis skeptical, yet no conventional explanation satisfied the evidence. The face captured over New Mexico became the clearest example, the most immediate, the most visceral. It served as a nexus for connecting otherwise isolated events into a larger motif, the presence of the unexplainable, the intrusion of the uncanny into otherwise mundane observation. Within military circles, conversations about the phenomenon were cautious but persistent. Officers discussed patterns maintaining strict secrecy. Photographs were catalogued anomalies, noted yet. Official publications avoided mention of faces, figures, or consciousness in any frame. Researchers debated possibilities, misalignment of film double exposure, psychological projection by the crew, atmospheric refraction, or even secret experimental equipment. None accounted for the clarity of the face, its alignment with natural light, or its apparent observation of the photographer. Each unexplained frame contributed to a growing sense that these incidents formed a consistent motif, one that bridged geography, time, and circumstance. Outside official channels, enthusiasts and private investigators began connecting dots across decades. Aviation forums, clandestine correspondences, and anecdotal collections revealed a web of occurrences linked by environment, method, and phenomenon. Desert regions were hotspots: New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, but forests, coastlines, and remote plains produced comparable anomalies. Individuals who had encountered these images or glimpsed such figures described similar emotional responses: unease, tension, a profound sense of being observed. The motif became psychological as well as visual. The anomaly was as much about perception and reaction as it was about empirical evidence. The motif extended into folklore and cultural narrative. Stories from indigenous communities, tales passed down through generations, spoke of watchers, guardians, spirits of the land. Observations of faces in unusual places were sometimes interpreted as warnings, sometimes as benign oversight, sometimes as portents. The Goddard Squadron photograph was not recognized in this context at the time, but retrospectively the image aligned precisely with these motifs, a figure appearing only in observation, singular and immobile, with eyes that seemed aware a presence unaccounted for by physical reality. Scholars of myth and legend noted the convergence between empirical anomaly and narrative pattern, suggesting a cultural resonance beyond mere coincidence. Analysts also noted behavioral consistencies. Pilots described the same phenomena when operating under extreme conditions, isolation, altitude, heat, and environmental monotony. Instruments occasionally flickered, compasses spun, radios emitted unintelligible signals. Observers experienced sudden chills, a feeling of pressure or presence, and the unshakable sensation of being watched. These psychological markers paralleled the physical manifestations captured in photographs. The face in the Goddard Squadron image was thus not only visually anomalous, but emblematic of a broader pattern, a bridge between environmental stress, human perception, and unexplained occurrence. Even contemporary investigations into historical anomalies referenced the Goddard photograph as a case study. Technicians attempted to replicate conditions using modern cameras, flight simulators, and atmospheric modeling. None could recreate the effect. The figure remained unique, a singular intersection of location, technology, observation, and mystery. Its clarity, precision, and psychological impact established it as a benchmark for the study of aerial anomalies and unexplained phenomena. Scholars noted that while other instances lacked documentation or persisted only as anecdote, the Goddard image provided undeniable evidence the anomaly could be observed, measured, and analyzed, yet remained wholly inexplicable. In connecting these events, a bridge formed linking deserts, forests, and plains, connecting the 1920s, 1930s, and decades beyond, uniting military observation with folklore, rational analysis with narrative tradition. The Goddard Squadron face was the keystone. It exemplified the recurring motif, a figure that defied physical laws, that intruded on observation without explanation, that elicited both fear and fascination. It confirmed that these anomalies were not random. They were patterned, persistent, and culturally resonant. The bridge between documented reality and folklore was solidified, providing a foundation upon which the climactic exploration of the anomaly's psychological and physical impact could be built. The motif would reemerge in later decades, inspiring questions, debates, and speculation. Researchers traced the lineage of anomalies to map recurring features: environment, angle, altitude, light, timing. Each connection reinforced the sense of continuity, of intentionality, of presence. The Goddard Squadron photograph remained central, a focal point, the clearest instance of a phenomenon that had echoed silently through decades, linking human observation, environmental extremity, and unexplained intrusion. As the bridge was drawn between empirical record and folklore, the stage was set for the climactic confrontation with the anomaly. The examination of evidence that defied all conventional explanation, the exploration of what it meant to witness something beyond perception, and the psychological, historical, and cultural ramifications of a single haunting frame frozen in time. The image of the Goddard Squadron haunted every eye that beheld it. Decades later, when the negative was retrieved from archives, faded yet intact, it demanded attention, a silent accusation of impossibility. Scholars leaned over light tables tracing the contours of the face, its gaze unyielding, unblinking, as though the figure had awareness of being observed. Each detail was precise, the shadowing aligned with the angle of the sun that day, the plane's altitude verified by logs and instruments, yet no one could place a human form in that space. The impossibility gnawed at the edges of reason, demanding a confrontation with the unknown. Lieutenant Stevens's journals were examined anew. He had recorded minor inconsistencies during the flight, subtle changes in the hum of engines, a chill in the cabin that defied desert heat, the weight of silence pressing against the cockpit glass. None of these entries indicated awareness of a figure. Yet in retrospect, they marked a psychic impression, a perception of presence that only the photograph revealed. Each annotation, each sketch in his margin notes, became a puzzle piece in a larger tableau, the build-up to a revelation that reality had momentarily faltered. Experts noted the anomaly, a singular moment frozen in chemical emulsion, a bridge between empirical observation and the inexplicable. Further investigation uncovered correspondence between Stevens Monroe and the photographic lab. The letters described the team's attempts to verify the negative replicate conditions and account for the figure scientifically. Every hypothesis failed. Light reflection, double exposure, chemical imperfection, lens aberration, all were systematically ruled out. The face remained clear and undeniable. The figure's features were human, yet its presence violated every physical law of the flight. It was as if someone or something had inserted itself into reality for an instant, captured not by chance but by design. Eyewitness accounts from other flights added weight to the mystery. Pilots operating in similar conditions reported sensations of observation. Instruments reacting unpredictably, shadows appearing where none should exist. One memo from the 1940s referenced a reconnaissance team over Arizona, noting unexplained presence recorded in frame visual recognition by crew impossible. Analysts drew parallels connecting decades of sightings into a coherent pattern, with the Goddard photograph as the clearest node. The anomaly was no longer isolated. It was emblematic of a persistent recurring phenomenon, a challenge to perception itself. The photograph became the subject of controlled experimentation. Modern experts recreated altitude sunlight camera angles and environmental conditions. High-resolution cameras, precision instruments, and environmental simulations could not reproduce the anomaly. Each attempt confirmed the uniqueness of the frame, the singularity of the figure's presence. The face resisted replication, resisting analysis, existing as a phenomenon that occupied a liminal space between reality and imagination. Researchers acknowledged the psychological impact the figure's gaze induced: unease, tension, a subtle sense of being watched. The anomaly was as much emotional as empirical, a challenge to both mind and evidence. Letters and interviews with surviving squadron members and their families revealed the personal toll. Stevens and Monroe recalled recurring dreams, flashbacks to the flight, a persistent unease when viewing aerial photographs. Technicians who handled the negative reported inexplicable reactions, sudden shivers, the feeling of eyes upon them, a need to step away. Even decades later, the anomaly exerted influence, a psychological residue, as if the presence captured in 1935 extended across time, embedding itself in the consciousness of those who engaged with it. The face was not passive. It was active in its effect, a silent witness, a provocateur. Historians contextualized the photograph within broader narratives of aerial observation and technological exploration. The anomaly became a benchmark, a reference point for unexplained occurrences. Comparisons were drawn to similar phenomena worldwide, yet none possessed the clarity, precision, or psychological resonance of the Goddard frame. The anomaly was studied as evidence of something beyond standard explanation, a phenomenon intersecting perception, environment, and observation. It demanded recognition, respect, and a reconsideration of what could be known versus what could only be inferred. Finally, the climax of the Goddard Squadron story resides not in resolution, but in confrontation. The face captured in that solitary frame embodies the intersection of reality and the inexplicable. It represents a rupture in perception, a fleeting breach of conventional understanding, and a reminder that observation does not guarantee comprehension. Every analysis, every attempt at rationalization, every technical replication falls short of accounting for the figure. The face remains eternally fixed in that moment, haunting, unyielding, a silent sentinel from the skies of New Mexico. The anomaly challenges every assumption, every method, every belief in complete understanding, leaving viewers to confront the unnerving possibility that reality itself can be interrupted briefly and profoundly in ways that refuse explanation yet demand acknowledgement. The face captured in the Goddard Squadron photograph remains a silent witness, staring across decades, refusing to be explained, resisting every attempt at rationalization. Despite exhaustive analysis, repeated experiments, and cross-referencing with every conceivable anomaly, it persists as a singular presence, a moment frozen, a breach in reality, a reminder that the skies above New Mexico held secrets beyond comprehension. The men who flew that day carried the weight of the encounter in silence, their memories colored by unease, their recollections intersecting with legend, perception, and the unknown. Each viewer who studies the frame feels the same pull, the same subtle insistence that the world is larger, stranger, and more enigmatic than it appears. As the desert stretches endlessly beneath an indifferent sun, the photograph serves as both evidence and enigma. It bridges history and folklore, fact and myth, capturing the collision view of human observation with something beyond human control. The image is a portal, a connection to the moment when technology and environment, rationality and fear intersected and produced an outcome that defied expectation. It is a testament to the persistence of mystery, to the fragility of certainty, and to the enduring capacity of a single frame to unsettle, provoke, and inspire. In the end, there are no answers. The face cannot be located in space or time, cannot be reproduced or explained, cannot be erased from memory. It exists as a question staring out from the film, silently demanding acknowledgement. Every attempt to classify it, to rationalize it, only strengthens its defiance. It is the anomaly that refuses to be tamed, a haunting presence in the otherwise ordinary skies of July 1935. Scholars, technicians, historians, and observers may speculate, may theorize, may recount folklore. But the truth of that instant remains inaccessible, locked within the emulsion of a single photograph, forever suspended between the known and the unknowable. The desert has a way of swallowing certainty. Heat shimmers, dust rises in unpredictable eddies, shadows stretch and vanish. The environment that produced the anomaly continues to hold sway over perception, shaping experience, blurring lines between observation and imagination. The Goddard Squadron photograph captures this interplay perfectly, a silent testimony that the world contains pockets of reality that defy explanation, moments that resist categorization, instances when the ordinary becomes extraordinary without warning. It is a reminder that the unknown is never far, that even the most methodical observations can encounter the inexplicable, and that curiosity often leads into territories where answers are absent, but wonder is abundant. You have just witnessed another file from Shadow Stories. The skies of New Mexico, the desert winds, the solitary plains, and the haunting face, they remain persistent, unresolved. If you want to explore more forgotten anomalies, strange occurrences, and the hidden intersections of history and mystery, subscribe and continue with us. Each story is a doorway into the unknown, a chance to confront the unexpected, and a reminder that reality often contains layers we are only beginning to perceive. The face captured in that single frame remains a silent sentinel, watching, waiting, and reminding us that some mysteries are eternal, some questions unanswerable, and some truths exist only in the act of observation.